Structures of the oral cavity. This should be fairly familiar from the respiratory chapter. We've got the hard palate, the soft palate, the tongue, and the nasopharynx and laryngopharynx. Then we've got the trachea and the esophagus. We're adding in now those salivary glands, so we can see here the parotid gland. On the right, we can see the submandibular gland, and then we can see the sublingual gland. So sub meaning below, below what? Lingual means tongue, mandibular means gland. So mostly going to be review here, but there are a few different things that, that you haven't seen before. Inside of the oral cavity, we've got teeth, tongue, hard palate, and soft palate. When we look at those teeth, we'll let you watch videos on your own. When we look at those teeth, those are going to be named, and we'll look at the different structures there. Here's your oral cavity proper. There's your teeth again, tongue, salivary glands, and now we start to look at the teeth. We break it into an upper arch and a lower arch. The naming of these teeth is going to be the same. So when we look at the upper arch, which we'll do here, we've got your central incisors out front. Next to those, we've got the lateral incisors, and then your canines. After your canines, you have your first and second premolars, and then you've got 3 sets of molars themselves, unless by chance you've had this tooth removed, which is a wisdom tooth. So that third molar is in fact the wisdom tooth. When we go to the lower arch, it's the exact same naming process. So we're going to go through all the exact same things: central, lateral, incisors, canines, premolars, and molars. We're not going to worry too much about the inside of a tooth, but if you look at, you've got enamel. Enamel is the hardest tissue in the body, and then that covers up the dentin. The dentin is going to be the most common thing, or the majority of the makeup of the tooth. And then we can see down at the bottom, we've got the branches of the alveolar vessels and nerves entering in through the root canal, and then we go into the pulp cavity up there. So that's when you have real sensitivity, is when they've had to drill through the enamel, through the dentin, and now you're into that pulp cavity where you have direct exposure to those free nerve endings. Tongue, not much to say there. There are some extrinsic tongue muscles, so these are anchoring it to the skeletal system. Most of the function, a little bit of the function is coming from these, but most of the function comes from the tongue itself. Now we've got the tongue, where we need to talk about the different taste buds. So little raised projections on here we call papillae, and in those we'll have hair-like projections, and we call those taste buds. These are just sending the signals of the flavor of what we're eating to the brain. There's 3 different types of papillae. In the very posterior of the tongue, near the root of the tongue, we have what we call the circumvallate papillae. These are big and large and only found in the back. Then on the lateral sides of the tongue, we've got the fungiform papillae, and on the top, we've got the filiform. All of this leading back to the oral pharynx there. Now here's the taste bud under microscope. So you can see that taste bud pore. That taste bud pore is going to have that microvilli, that hair sticking out, and that's going to extend through there to the tongue surface, and then you're going to get those taste signals. You've got other supporting cells and gustatory cells, and these are actually renewing themselves quite often, because if you think about it, you're damaging them all the time. So about every 10 days you're getting new cells here. Salivary glands, now we're going to look at them individually and name them. This is the parotid gland. So this is out in your cheek underneath the zygomatic and temporal bone, or the zygomatic arch. From there you have a duct going into the oral cavity, the parotid duct. If you stick your tongue laterally, you can feel a little flap out there on the left and on the right, little triangular flap. That is where the parotid duct is dumping into the oral cavity. Below the mandible, we've got the submandibular gland. That submandibular gland will then have a duct of its own called the submandibular duct. That submandibular duct is also sharing it's the same passageway that we use for those sublingual, or below the tongue, glands. Here's what those salivary glands look like. So here's parotid. Next up, we've got submandibular and sublingual. So parotid, we're mostly going to be producing alpha amylase here, so breaking down starches. And we've got 2 different types of cells that we're going to see in these glands. We've got serous acinus cells and serous cells. So the serous cells are going to produce the watery saliva with ions and proteins, and it's essentially the alpha amylase, and that's to break down starches. So this is where the beginning of digestion takes place. And then the other cells are going to produce more things to help us lubricate things along the way. Didn't mean to do that. Next up, we've got the submandibular. Same types of cells, serous acinus and mucus acinus. So the mucus obviously producing the mucus, whereas the serous acinus is going to be producing that salivary amylase to break down starches. Next up, we've got the sublingual gland. A little bit different composition. So you can see here we've got more mucus cells, fewer serous cells. Here we've got more mucus cells, fewer serous cells. Now before we move on, the tongue, there is innervation to the tongue. So the innervation to the tongue is going to be from a few different regions basically. So general innervation is from the lingual branch of cranial nerve 3. But then we're getting also taste from cranial nerve number 9, the glossopharyngeal nerve, and also from the facial nerve. There we go. All right, now we got muscles of mastication, temporalis, and we got two different masseter muscles, the superficial and the deep. Two different pterygoid muscles, the medial and the lateral. So all of these are aiding in mastication. Mastication is chewing. So these are all going to do aid in mechanical digestion. We've already seen the epiglottis, larynx, trachea, and esophagus, so we'll breeze past this. There's your epiglottis. It's not going to let me click it. There's your epiglottis right there. You can look down inside now, and you can see that here's your true vocal cords. And again, all these muscles around there are going to allow you to change the diameter, if I can get to it. These muscles back in here will allow you to change the diameter of that, changing the pitch of your voice.